Dear chosen one, be careful who you mock and judge, for the universe has a way of humbling even the most arrogant. They thought it was harmless, a casual joke, a meaningless night out, a visit to a psychic just for fun. But what started as entertainment turned into something they will never forget. They sat there, smug and self-assured, expecting a light-hearted reading, something ridiculous they could twist into another reason to belittle you. But the moment your name was spoken, everything changed. The air grew thick. The psychic's expression hardened. What was supposed to be a joke became a revelation, one so raw, so undeniable that it sent a chill down their spine. Here's a fact most people don't realize. Over 85% of those who visit psychics don't actually believe in them until the reading exposes something they were never ready to face. And for them, that moment came when the psychic's words didn't echo their laughter, but instead shattered their illusion. They had come expecting to be entertained, but instead they found themselves confronted by a truth they couldn't outrun. They thought they were in control, but they weren't prepared for the weight of what was revealed. Now, they're not laughing, they're shaking. But before we uncover what really happened when they whispered your name into the spiritual realm, I want to take a moment to sincerely thank those of you who have supported this channel through Super Thanks. Your generosity allows these messages to reach those who need them most, and whether you've donated or simply engaged by watching, commenting and sharing, you are deeply appreciated. Now, to align yourself with divine wisdom and unstoppable favor, drop 777 in the comments. This isn't just a number, it's a spiritual frequency, a declaration that you are walking in alignment, protected and chosen. Now, let's reveal the full story and why they left that session haunted by a truth they never saw coming. God's chosen ones. They consulted a psychic about you as a joke, and now they're shaking. Number 1. Their mockery opened a portal to their truth. They thought it was just a joke, a meaningless way to pass the time, an amusement at your expense. They didn't think twice before tossing your name into the conversation, laughing as they sat down for what they assumed would be an entertaining session. But what they failed to understand is that in the realm of energy and intention, nothing is ever just for fun. The moment they spoke your name, something shifted. Have you ever felt the weight of your own presence, even when you aren't in the room? That's because you don't just exist. You carry something that cannot be dismissed or ridiculed without consequences. And as soon as they let your name pass their lips in that space, they unknowingly triggered a spiritual reaction they were not prepared to face. At first, they expected the session to be light-hearted, maybe a vague or generic reading that would confirm their assumptions about you. After all, who were you to them? Just another person they could mock, someone they believed was insignificant. But when the psychic closed their eyes and tapped into the unseen, the energy in the room changed. The air thickened, the laughter faded, the smirks disappeared. Why did everything suddenly feel so heavy? The psychic's expression shifted from casual to serious. They weren't just looking at you, they were seeing everything. The invisible thread connecting you to these people. The undercurrents of energy that had long gone unspoken. The tension, the jealousy, the unresolved emotions. And then, in an instant, the entire dynamic flipped. Why did it feel like the reading wasn't even about you anymore, but about them? The words that followed cut deeper than they expected. The psychic spoke truths they had buried, truths they weren't ready to face. Their thoughts about you were louder than they had realized. so loud that even in the spiritual realm they could not be ignored. Their envy, their resentment, their secret fixation, all of it was suddenly laid bare, raw and undeniable. They had walked in expecting to laugh at you, but now they felt exposed. For whatever is hidden is meant to be disclosed, and whatever is concealed is meant to be brought out into the open. Mark 4:22. What they failed to understand is that you were never the joke. They weren't just mentioning your name for amusement. They were obsessing over you, and they didn't even realize it until that moment. But why? Why do certain people become fixated on you, even when they claim not to care? Why do they monitor your every move, talk about you when you're not there, and seek validation from others about what they think of you? Could it be that something about you unsettles them? This is a pattern history has repeated time and time again. Look at Vincent van Gogh. He was ridiculed, dismissed, cast aside as a nobody. They laughed at him, convinced that his work held no meaning. But today, his paintings are worth millions. His name is eternal. And those who mocked him, they are forgotten. How many times have you seen it happen? Those who are misunderstood, belittled and treated as a joke often end up being the ones the world cannot forget. Could that be what's happening to you? The psychic didn't need to exaggerate or dramatize the reading. The truth spoke for itself. They had crossed a line by speaking your name carelessly, and now they were faced with a reality they couldn't escape. They had tampered with something they had no understanding of, and now the universe had answered. No weapon that is formed against you shall prosper, and every tongue that shall rise against you in judgment you shall condemn. Isaiah 54:17. They left that room shaken, no longer laughing, no longer feeling in control. The feeling followed them home, creeping into their thoughts late at night, replaying in their minds when they least expected it. What had they done? Why did it feel like something had shifted? They tried to shake it off, to convince themselves that it was all nonsense. But deep down, they knew. They had been given a glimpse into something far greater than their understanding, and what they thought was a joke had, in the end, only exposed them. Because when you tamper with a chosen one, whether out of curiosity, mockery, or spite, the truth always finds a way to reveal itself, and now they will never be able to unsee it. Number 2. The joke became the mirror. They couldn't escape. They walked into that psychic space with an air of arrogance, convinced they were in control. To them, it was nothing more than a joke, a casual amusement at your expense. You were just a name, someone to be mocked, someone they assumed had no real significance in their world. But what they failed to understand is that when you summon a name in a space of energy, you invite the truth, and the truth does not play games. At first, everything seemed to go as planned. They smirked, exchanged glances, waiting to be entertained. But then something shifted. The psychic's expression hardened. The air grew thick. The words that followed did not validate their mockery, but instead turned the spotlight onto them. They expected to hear about you, but instead they were forced to hear about themselves. It was as if an unseen force had placed a mirror before them, revealing every insecurity, every hidden resentment, every crack in the image they had carefully constructed. The joke was supposed to be on you, but suddenly it felt as though they were the ones being exposed. Have you ever noticed how people who claim not to care about you always seem to fixate on you the most? They act indifferent, but your name is always on their lips. Your presence lingers in their minds longer than they'd ever admit. Why do you hold so much space in their thoughts? What is it about you that unsettles them so deeply? That's what the psychic began to uncover. The session was no longer about you. It was about why they couldn't stop thinking about you in the first place. The psychic didn't hold back. They stripped away every mask, cut through every layer of sarcasm, and spoke words that landed like a blade. It wasn't curiosity that brought them here. It was something far more telling. Was it jealousy? Was it guilt? Was it an unspoken fear that you carried something they lacked? The more the psychic spoke, the more uncomfortable they became. Their laughter had long since faded, replaced by shifting glances and the tightening of their throats. They weren't laughing anymore. They were listening, and they hated what they were hearing. For the word of God is alive and active, sharper than any double-edged sword. It penetrates even to dividing soul and spirit, joints and marrow. It judges the thoughts and attitudes of the heart. Hebrews 4:12. The truth was undeniable. Their fixation on you wasn't accidental. The psychic saw through their facade and revealed what even they had been unwilling to admit. You challenged them. Something about your existence exposed their weaknesses, forced them to acknowledge parts of themselves they had long tried to ignore, and that realization shook them to their core. History has a way of repeating itself. Look at Steve Jobs, dismissed, mocked, ridiculed for his vision, yet years later, those who doubted him found themselves living in the world he created. His presence disrupted the norm, and people hated him for it. But who do we remember today? The ones who mocked him, or the one who changed the world? They devise injustice and say, "We have perfected a secret plan," but the mind and heart of a person are deep. Psalm 64 verse 6. They had come expecting to leave that session laughing, reassured in their own superiority, convinced that they had made a fool of you. But instead, they walked out haunted. The joke had taken on a life of its own, growing into something they could no longer control. They hadn't been given the satisfaction of laughing at you. They had been forced to confront themselves. Their feelings about you had never truly been about you. They were about their own inadequacies, their own self-doubt, their own unspoken fears. And now, no matter how hard they tried to shake the feeling, no matter how many times they told themselves it was just a coincidence, they knew. They thought they were playing a game at your expense. But in the end, the joke wasn't on you, it was on them. And no amount of laughter would ever silence the truth they now had to face. Number 3, they triggered a chain reaction in the spirit world. When they sat down in front of the psychic and casually dropped your name into the conversation, they had no idea what they had just set in motion. What they assumed was a harmless joke, a way to mock you and maybe hear something ridiculous, turned into something far greater than they could have ever anticipated. They walked into that session thinking they were in control, but the moment your name entered the air, they unknowingly stepped into a spiritual storm of their own making. In the spiritual realm, intentions carry weight. Words are not just sounds, they are vibrations, signals that ripple through the unseen world. When they chose to make you the punchline of their evening, when they mocked, belittled, and spoke about you as if you were insignificant, they weren't just talking, they were calling forth a response. Do not be deceived. God is not mocked, for whatever one sows, that will he also reap. Galatians 6:7. And the universe answered. At first, everything seemed light-hearted, but then the air in the room shifted. The psychic's demeanor changed. Something had been disturbed. And it wasn't just about you, it was about the chain reaction they had unknowingly triggered in the spirit world. Have you ever noticed how people who underestimate you always seem to end up facing their own downfall? It's not because you seek revenge, but because divine justice has a way of balancing the scales. They sat there expecting a session about you, but the moment the psychic tapped into the energy, it became clear that the real subject of the reading was them. The psychic didn't just pick up on you. They picked up on the energy they had unleashed. And what they saw was not what these people had expected. The session stopped being about you and instead became a reflection of them, their arrogance, their hidden fears, the karmic patterns they had been running from. Instead of receiving embarrassing details about your life, they were suddenly staring at the wreckage of their own. The magnifying glass had been turned around, and they were the ones under scrutiny. Why were certain patterns in their lives repeating? Why did they feel a growing sense of unease, like they had tampered with something they should have left alone? Have you entered the storehouses of the snow, or seen the storehouses of the hail, which I reserve for times of trouble, for days of war and battle? Job 38, 22-23. The more the psychic spoke, the more unsettled they became. What rattled them most wasn't just the words, it was the feeling. The realization that they had disturbed something sacred, something they were never meant to meddle with. They had stepped onto spiritual ground they had no business walking on, and now they had to deal with the consequences. This isn't the first time history has seen this happen. Look at Richard Nixon, a man who operated under the assumption that he could manipulate and control outcomes in his favor. He thought he was untouchable, that his actions were carefully concealed. But energy has a way of exposing what is hidden. The very tapes he recorded to maintain control became the evidence that took him down. Isn't it ironic how those who think they are pulling the strings often end up trapped in their own web? What if their obsession with you was never about you, but about what your existence revealed about them? What if your presence, your growth, and your resilience were forcing them to confront truths they had spent their entire lives avoiding? They had wanted answers about you. Instead, they got a magnifying glass over their own flaws, their own unresolved wounds, their own shadows. The universe has a funny way of turning bad intentions into lessons. And that's exactly what happened. They thought they were consulting a psychic. But what they really did was trigger an energetic backlash that forced them to face themselves. What was supposed to be a joke became a revelation. And they left that session not laughing, but trembling, because deep down they knew they had just scratched the surface of something far bigger than they could ever comprehend. Number 4, you became their catalyst for awakening. They walked into that session convinced they held all the power. This was supposed to be their moment, to mock, to belittle, to amuse themselves at your expense. But what they failed to realize is that the universe does not play games with divine energy. They thought they were in control, but the moment they uttered your name, the script flipped in a way they never saw coming. Have you ever noticed how those who dislike you the most are often the ones most obsessed with you? They claim you don't matter, yet they watch, they comment, they linger in the shadows of your existence. Why do you trigger such a response in them? Why does your presence, whether direct or distant, disrupt their sense of stability? The moment your name left their lips, a chain reaction was set in motion, a mirror was held up, and they were forced to confront truths they had long buried. The psychic wasn't just reading you, they were reading the connection, the invisible force that tethered you to them in ways they had refused to acknowledge. You weren't their victim or their target. You were their catalyst. For nothing is hidden except to be made manifest, nor is anything secret except to come to light. Mark 4:22. The reading hit harder than they expected. They thought their fixation on you was harmless, just an afterthought. But why were they so consumed with you? Why did your name hold such weight in their subconscious? The answer was simple, yet devastating. Their energy toward you, whether admiration, envy, or resentment, was a reflection of something unresolved within themselves. You represented something they either wanted or feared. The psychic didn't need to force the message. The truth was undeniable. Your presence in their life was not incidental. It was shaking them up, disrupting their illusions, forcing them to question themselves in ways they weren't prepared for. They had tried to dismiss you, but deep down you were a lesson they could not escape. And then came the part that shattered their ego. Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. Proverbs 16:18. The psychic revealed what they had been too afraid to admit. Their obsession with you was never about you. It was about their own fears, insecurities, and unfulfilled potential. Maybe they resented how you continued to rise despite their doubts. Maybe they envied the way you carried yourself without fear. Maybe your growth highlighted their stagnation. But no matter what the root was, they could no longer deny it. Your existence had become a catalyst for their awakening. This isn't the first time the world has seen this unfold. Look at Oprah Winfrey. Throughout her career, she faced relentless criticism, ridicule, and doubt. People mocked her weight, her background, even her dreams. But in the end, she didn't just succeed. She became one of the most powerful and influential figures in modern history. And what happened to those who tried to tear her down? They faded into irrelevance. Do you see the pattern? Those who mock the chosen ones often end up learning the hardest lesson of all. You cannot diminish what is divinely protected. They had walked into that session expecting to laugh at you. But by the time the reading was over, they weren't laughing anymore. They were shaken, confronted with the reality that their attempt to turn you into a joke had led them straight into their own reckoning. You weren't their victim. You were their wake-up call. And the truth they had just uncovered, there was no going back from it. Number 5. They thought they were the hunters, but they became the hunted. They walked into the session smug and self-assured, convinced they held the upper hand. To them, this was just another game, another opportunity to mock, to belittle, to dissect you like prey caught in their grasp. They thought they were the hunters, strategic, in control, ready to enjoy the spectacle at your expense. But the moment your name was spoken, the game shifted. The psychic didn't take the bait. They didn't indulge in the mockery or confirm the shallow narratives these people had spun about you. Instead, the air in the room grew dense, as if something unseen had entered the space. Have you ever witnessed a moment where laughter dies, not because of silence, but because truth enters the room? That's what happened here. The session was supposed to be about you, but it wasn't your flaws, your mistakes, or your weaknesses that came to light. It was theirs. Whoever digs a pit will fall into it. If someone rolls a stone, it will roll back on them. Proverbs 26:27. The psychic began peeling back layers, exposing the real reason they had come in the first place. Why were they so consumed with you? Why did your energy, your presence, hold such a grip on their emotions? They had convinced themselves this was about ridiculing you, but what they hadn't realized was that they had walked straight into their own reckoning. And the answers were not what they wanted to hear. The psychic didn't describe you as weak, as lost, as someone beneath them. Instead, they turned the mirror onto these so-called hunters and exposed the truth. Their jealousy, their insecurities, their desperate need to diminish others just to feel powerful. It was never about you. It was about the parts of themselves they were too afraid to confront. For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there will be disorder and every vile practice. James 3:16. Every negative thing they tried to bring up about you, every cruel joke, every attempt to twist the narrative, bounced back onto them like an unshakable reflection of their own shortcomings. Have you ever noticed how people who try to tear you down are often fighting battles they refuse to acknowledge? That's because your energy forces them to see their own failures. They thought they were in control, but the reading unraveled their illusion piece by piece. The psychic saw through the facade, exposing the cracks in their confidence, the fear behind their arrogance, the envy they refused to admit. And by the time the session ended, the ones who had walked in as predators left as prey, exposed, vulnerable, and completely disarmed. This is nothing new. Look at Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla. Edison, a man of status and power, worked relentlessly to discredit Tesla, mocking his vision and undermining his genius at every turn. But history has a way of revealing the truth. Today, Tesla's name is synonymous with brilliance, while Edison's legacy carries the stain of his desperate attempts to suppress what he could not control. Doesn't it always seem that those who try the hardest to destroy others only end up exposing themselves? They thought this session would confirm their delusions of superiority. Instead, it forced them to see what they had long ignored: their own inadequacies, their own wounds, their own fear of irrelevance. They had come expecting to dissect you. Instead, they had been dissected. They thought they were the hunters, but by the time they left, they had become the hunted. Number 6. The psychic revealed the hidden influence you have over them. They thought they had control. They thought this was just another moment of amusement, a harmless opportunity to mock you, to use your name as entertainment. What they never expected was that the joke would turn into a revelation, one that shattered their sense of self. When the psychic began the reading, they leaned in, waiting to hear petty gossip about your life. They wanted confirmation of their assumptions, something to fuel their superiority. But what they heard instead hit uncomfortably close to home. Have you ever wondered why certain people seem fixated on you, even when they claim not to care? Why your name lingers in their conversations, your presence lingers in their thoughts? They may pretend you don't matter, but their actions betray them. That's exactly what happened here. Without realizing it, they had made you a central figure in their inner world. The psychic laid it out with brutal clarity. You weren't just someone they mocked. You were someone who occupied space in their mind far more than they could admit. For as he thinks in his heart, so is he. Proverbs 23:7. The energy of their own obsession had become undeniable. The psychic described how your presence lingered in their subconscious, influencing their thoughts, their choices, their emotions. They weren't just fixated on you, they had been measuring themselves against you. Why was your existence shaping their reactions? Why did they feel the need to compare themselves to you? At first, they wanted to deny it. But how could they, when someone who knew nothing about them had just exposed their most hidden truth? What rattled them the most was the realization that their feelings toward you weren't coming from a place of power or superiority. It wasn't that they looked down on you, it was that they felt beneath you. This revelation wasn't just shocking, it was humiliating. Pride brings a person low, but the lowly in spirit gain honor. Proverbs 29:23. They had convinced themselves that their actions toward you were casual, meaningless, insignificant. But if that were true, why were they so consumed by you? History repeats itself over and over. Look at Jay-Z and Nas. Two legendary artists, yet for years, Jay-Z's lyrics and moves were shaped by Nas's presence in the industry. The rivalry wasn't just about music, it was about influence. Jay-Z couldn't ignore Nas, no matter how much he claimed to be on top. Sometimes the person you try hardest to dismiss is the one shaping you the most. Could that be what's happening here? Could it be that your presence has been guiding them more than they'd ever admit? Hearing this from a psychic A stranger who had no personal stake in the situation was like being stripped bare. They left realizing that you weren't just a passing thought. You were their mirror, their trigger, their greatest lesson. And the worst part, you probably didn't even know it. Number 7. Their intention to mock you backfired energetically. They thought they were walking into that session with the upper hand, ready to use your name as a joke, to entertain themselves at your expense. But what they didn't realize was that they were playing a dangerous game with energy they could not control. Have you ever noticed how those who try to humiliate others often end up exposing their own weaknesses instead? They came in with bad intentions, hoping to hear something that would feed their ego or diminish your worth. But in the world of karma, intent is everything. Instead of finding something to laugh about, they set off a chain reaction that left them shaken. Whoever digs a pit will fall into it. If someone rolls a stone, it will roll back on them. Proverbs 26:27. The psychic didn't hold back. The energy in the room shifted, and the reading took a turn they never expected. Their attempt to mock you turned into a brutal confrontation with themselves. They had come looking for your flaws, your weaknesses, something to validate their mockery. But instead, they were met with revelations about their own struggles, their own insecurities, their own failures. The psychic wasn't reading you anymore. They were reading them. Every word spoken felt like a karmic slap, as if the universe was looking them in the eye and saying, "You get what you give." The negativity they had tried to project onto you had bounced back, hitting them in places they weren't prepared for. The reading revealed not just their unspoken fears, but how their very actions were shaping their own reality in ways they hadn't even realized. Do not be deceived. God is not mocked, for whatever one sows, that will he also reap. Galatians 6:7. Why was their own life falling apart while they were so busy focusing on yours? Why did the energy they had directed at you seem to be manifesting in their own failures, their own struggles, their own moments of humiliation? This isn't new. Look at Howard Hughes, a billionaire, a man of immense power, yet consumed by paranoia, control, and fear. He tried to manipulate, dominate, and control those around him, only to find himself trapped in his own mental prison. Those who spend their time trying to diminish others often end up caged by their own energy. Could that be what's happening here? Could their obsession with tearing you down be the very thing unraveling their own lives? By the end of the session, the joke wasn't just on them, it was shaping their reality. The energy they had directed at you had ricocheted, leaving them exposed, vulnerable, and shaken. Mocking someone else doesn't elevate you, it reveals exactly where you're broken. And now, they had no choice but to carry the weight of that lesson, a karmic reckoning they never saw coming. Number 8. The psychic unveiled. Their fear of your potential. They walked into that session expecting entertainment, something trivial about you, something to mock, something to twist into their own narrative. They had convinced themselves that you were insignificant, that whatever was said about you would be just another reason to laugh, another way to feed their ego. But what they got instead was something far more unsettling. Have you ever noticed how those who try to minimize you are often the ones who see your potential the clearest? That's because deep down they know exactly who you are becoming, even before you do. The psychic didn't focus on your flaws or mistakes. Instead, they painted a picture of someone with a purpose, someone whose energy couldn't be ignored, someone who was destined for more than the small, limited version of life others tried to confine them to. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. Jeremiah 29:11. It wasn't just what the psychic said, it was how it felt. The atmosphere in the room shifted as they began speaking of your resilience, your drive, and your ability to rise despite every obstacle. This wasn't about who you are now, it was about who you are becoming. And that's what terrified them the most. They had spent so much time trying to downplay you, trying to convince themselves that you weren't a threat, that you were nothing more than a passing phase in their mind. But now they were being forced to face the truth. You are not just passing through life, you are building something extraordinary. The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Psalm 118, verse 22. This shook them to the core because it confirmed what they had secretly feared all along. You are not someone they can write off. They've watched you grow. They've seen your progress, tried to dismiss it, even ridiculed it. But now, they were hearing the truth from someone who had never even met you. How could a stranger describe you in such a way that resonated so deeply? The psychic spoke of your energy as something unstoppable, something undeniable, something that would not only overshadow their expectations, but even their own accomplishments. Why do you think certain people become so obsessed with keeping you small? Why do they try to control how others see you, try to place doubts in your mind, try to plant seeds of insecurity? Because deep down, they fear what will happen when you step fully into who you are meant to be. And now, that fear had been spoken into existence. They intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. Genesis 50:20. The worst part for them wasn't just the psychic's words. It was knowing they had been right to feel threatened by you. Every joke they made about you, every attempt to downplay your success, every dismissive comment, none of it had ever been random. It was all rooted in something much deeper. History has repeated this pattern before. Think of J.K. Rowling. She was a struggling single mother, living on welfare, scribbling stories in coffee shops. Publishers rejected her manuscript for Harry Potter over and over again, dismissing her as irrelevant, insignificant. But what happened? The very people who once saw her as just another writer had to watch as she became one of the most successful authors in history. Imagine how many of those same people now wish they had supported her instead of doubting her. Or look at Michael Jordan. Cut from his high school basketball team, laughed at, doubted, overlooked. They told him he wasn't good enough. But instead of shrinking, he used their rejection as fuel, and the world remembers his name, while those who doubted him have faded into irrelevance. Could that be what's happening here? Could the very people who tried to minimize you one day have to watch you rise beyond their imagination? They had walked into that session thinking they had the upper hand, expecting to confirm their own delusions of your insignificance. But instead, they left with the one realization they feared the most. You are destined for more than they ever thought possible. They weren't afraid of you failing. They were afraid of you succeeding. And now they know they can't stop it. Number 9. They accidentally invoked protection around you. They thought they were just making fun of you, tossing your name into the air like it meant nothing. To them, this was just another joke, another casual amusement, another moment of mockery at your expense. What they failed to realize is that words are not just sound. They carry weight, they hold power, and they can summon forces far beyond human understanding. Have you ever noticed how people who try to tear you down often end up elevating you instead? They assume that speaking your name in that space would be harmless, something insignificant. But in the spiritual realm, nothing is insignificant. By uttering your name in that psychic reading, they unknowingly triggered something far greater than their own intentions. For he will command his angels concerning you to guard you in all your ways. Psalm 91:11. The energy in the room shifted. What was meant to be a joke became a spiritual summoning. The psychic didn't just pick up on you, they picked up on the force that surrounds you. A presence so powerful, so undeniable, that their laughter faded into an uneasy silence. Suddenly, the session wasn't about you anymore. It was about what stood behind you, above you, and around you. The psychic described it without hesitation, a shield, an energy field so strong that their words, their sarcasm, their mockery could not touch you. It wasn't just about who you are, it was about what protects you. No weapon that is formed against you shall prosper, and every tongue that shall rise against you in judgment you shall condemn. Isaiah 54:17. That's when the realization struck them. Everything they had tried to send your way, every insult, every bitter thought, every attempt to diminish you, was not only being absorbed, but reflected back tenfold. Why did it feel like they had just done something irreversible? The psychic explained what they had already begun to feel deep in their gut. You were untouchable, guarded by something they couldn't comprehend, but could feel in the very air around them. Their negativity had no power here. It only served to strengthen the forces protecting you. History has shown this pattern before. Look at Joan of Arc. The more her enemies mocked her, the stronger her divine conviction became. The more they tried to break her, the more history solidified her legacy as a warrior chosen by God. Those who tried to destroy her ended up proving just how powerful she really was. Could that be what's happening here? Had their obsession with you, their attempt to belittle you, actually strengthened what was already protecting you? That's what rattled them the most. Not just the psychic's words, but the feeling that they had unknowingly played themselves in the worst way possible. Every jab, every sarcastic remark, every ounce of ill intent had only served to fortify you. What was meant to weaken you had, in fact, reinforced the divine shield around you. They left that session shaken, knowing they had drawn attention to themselves in ways they weren't prepared for. You weren't just a target of their jokes. You were someone under divine protection. Their mockery didn't harm you, it empowered you. And in the process, it exposed their weakness and left them wondering if they had just made a mistake they couldn't undo. Number 10. They were forced to acknowledge their jealousy. They walked into that psychic reading expecting to leave with another joke, another story to share at your expense. They thought they would walk out laughing, feeling validated in their mockery of you, certain that their version of reality, the one where they were superior and you were insignificant, would be reinforced. But what they didn't expect, what they couldn't have prepared for, was that the session would turn into a reckoning they never saw coming. Have you ever noticed how those who claim to dislike you always seem to know the most about you? They act indifferent, yet they linger, watching, commenting, dissecting your every move. Why? What is it about you that commands so much of their attention? They walked into that session expecting to hear something amusing, something they could twist into another sarcastic remark, but the psychic wasted no time in exposing the truth. The reading wasn't about you at all. It was about them. The question was no longer about who you were, but rather why they were so fixated on you in the first place. At first, they tried to laugh it off, assuming the session had gone slightly off track. But then, the psychic spoke a single word that cut through their pride like a blade. Jealousy. It landed like a punch to the gut. Not because it was untrue, but because it was the one thing they had spent so much time denying. They had convinced themselves that their comments about you were just harmless observations, that their fixation was normal, even justified. But the psychic dismantled that illusion piece by piece. They weren't just watching you, they were measuring themselves against you. Every time they spoke your name, it wasn't about you at all. It was about what you represented. Jealousy has a way of twisting the mind. making people act against their own best interests. Think of Cain and Abel. Cain wasn't just envious of Abel's offering, he was consumed by the idea that God favored Abel over him. Instead of seeking to improve himself, instead of looking inward to understand why his offering fell short, Cain allowed his jealousy to grow into resentment and then into rage. And what did he do? He lashed out, believing that if he eliminated Abel, his own inadequacy would disappear. But it didn't. Instead, Cain's actions only cemented his downfall, making him a cursed man, wandering without peace for the rest of his life. Anger is cruel, and wrath is like a flood, but jealousy is even more dangerous. Proverbs 27:4. The most unbearable part wasn't just hearing the truth, it was realizing how deeply it resonated. Maybe it was your success, maybe it was the way you carried yourself, unshaken by their opinions. Maybe it was the fact that, unlike them, you didn't need validation to shine. Whatever it was enough to spark an envy so strong it consumed them, one they refused to acknowledge until it was laid bare before them. For the first time, they had to sit with the realization that their jokes and jabs weren't clever. They were desperate. They weren't mocking you because they saw you as weak. They were mocking you because deep down they knew you were stronger than them. History has seen this play out time and time again. Look at Napoleon Bonaparte and the Duke of Wellington. Napoleon, a man who had conquered nearly all of Europe, dismissed Wellington as insignificant, an unworthy opponent. But that underestimation, that refusal to acknowledge Wellington's quiet strength, led to Napoleon's ultimate defeat at Waterloo. It wasn't Wellington who was obsessed with Napoleon. It was Napoleon who couldn't stand the idea that someone else could challenge his place. That same pattern repeats over and over. The ones who mock, who diminish, who attempt to erase, they are always the ones who fall. For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there will be disorder and every vile practice. James 3:16. What rattled them the most wasn't just the psychic's words, but the fact that they couldn't deny them. Sitting in that chair, stripped of every excuse, every false narrative, every justification they had crafted to make themselves feel superior, they had no choice but to face themselves. Their obsession with your life wasn't about you. It was about them, their own fears, their own insecurities, their own unfulfilled potential. They had spent so much time trying to convince the world that you didn't matter. But if that were true, why were they so consumed with you? And for the first time, they had to sit with the realization that you were never the problem. They were. Number 11. They learned. You are a divine mystery they can't touch. What they came expecting to hear, a laugh, a joke at your expense, turned into something they weren't prepared for. They had walked into that session thinking they were in control, expecting to hear something trivial, something they could twist into another reason to mock you. But the moment the psychic spoke, everything changed. The reading wasn't about your past mistakes, your flaws, or anything that would satisfy their ego. Instead, it was about something far more elusive, something they could neither understand nor diminish. You are not just an ordinary person. You are a divine mystery, someone with a higher purpose, someone operating on a level they can't even begin to comprehend. This wasn't flattery or coincidence, it was truth. The psychic's words hit them in a way that left them paralyzed, a realization settling in that they had underestimated you in the worst way possible. Have you ever noticed how people try to define you, reduce you, put you in a box, yet nothing ever seems to stick? It's because you were never meant to be understood by them. The psychic didn't just describe you as someone with potential or someone who had overcome hardships. They hinted at something deeper, a force, a calling, an unseen presence that surrounds you, and that made them uncomfortable in a way they couldn't explain. The secret things belong to the Lord our God, but the things revealed belong to us and to our children forever. Deuteronomy 29:29. They had come into that room believing they were dealing with an ordinary person, someone they could dissect, mock, and belittle. But what they found instead was a presence they couldn't touch. The psychic described unseen forces guiding and protecting you, forces that were impenetrable and unknowable to those who tried to challenge you. It was as if the message was clear. You weren't just living your life. You were part of something sacred, something bigger than they could grasp. This revelation shook them. They had been playing a game, reducing you to a joke, believing they held some form of power over you. But now, for the first time, they faced the reality that they had stepped into something far greater than themselves. Think of Nikola Tesla and J.P. Morgan. Tesla was a visionary, a man whose ideas transcended time, yet Morgan, a man of wealth and power, sought to suppress him, to own him, to diminish what he couldn't control. But history doesn't remember Morgan's attempts at suppression. It remembers Tesla's genius, because no matter how much someone tries to limit a chosen one, destiny always prevails. No weapon that is formed against you shall prosper, and every tongue that shall rise against you in judgment you shall condemn. Isaiah 54:17. That's what rattled them the most. They had spent so much time trying to belittle you, only to realize they were dealing with something untouchable. The psychic described how the very essence of who you are is wrapped in a protective energy, an armor built by forces they have no access to. Their jealousy, their mockery, their attempts to diminish you, none of it could ever penetrate this sacred shield. The moment they left that room, a weight settled on them. They were no longer laughing. They were no longer smug. They were intimidated, because for the first time they saw that the one they had tried to control was never within their reach to begin with. You weren't just someone to mock or challenge. You were a divine force they could never grasp, no matter how hard they tried. And in that moment, they understood that they were not the ones in control. You were. Number 12. Your name invoked a shift in the room. The moment your name was spoken, everything changed. What had started as a casual, almost flippant conversation suddenly took on an entirely different energy. The room, once filled with light-hearted amusement and smug confidence, became heavy. It was as if an unseen force had settled into the space, shifting the atmosphere in a way that neither the psychic nor anyone else could ignore. Have you ever noticed how your presence, even when you're not physically there, seems to command attention? How your name lingers in conversations, how people react differently when they speak about you. That's because you don't just exist, you carry something with you. And at that moment, they felt it. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. John 1:5. The air grew thick, almost charged, like the very room recognized that something significant was at play. The psychic, who had been light-hearted and conversational just moments before, suddenly became serious. Their tone shifted, their energy changed. There was a new weight in their voice as they described a powerful presence tied to you, something that couldn't be dismissed as mere coincidence or a passing joke. It wasn't just about you as a person, it was about the energy you carried. They hadn't expected this. They had expected to hear something trivial, something they could manipulate and twist into entertainment, but instead they were met with something far greater than their understanding. The psychic spoke of a force surrounding you, one that was both protective and magnetic, something that couldn't be easily explained, let alone controlled. They hinted at how this presence made them rethink everything they thought they knew. They tried to rationalize it, to brush it off, but the shift in the air was undeniable. Look at history. Think of Harriet Tubman, a woman who, by all human logic, should have been caught, captured, and destroyed for defying the system. And yet, time and time again, she moved unseen, guided by an intuition so strong it baffled those who pursued her. People underestimated her, dismissed her, but she was carrying something greater, something divine, something protected. That's the same kind of energy that now made the room fall into silence at the mere mention of your name. He will cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you will find refuge. His faithfulness will be your shield and rampart. Psalm 91, verse 4. What was supposed to be a trivial reading, a bit of fun at your expense, became something far deeper. The joke disappeared. The laughter faded. The energy around you had its own life force, a powerful current that altered the dynamics in the room. It was clear now that this wasn't just about you. This was about what stood behind you, what walked with you, what covered you. Why did a mere mention of your name cause such a shift? Because your presence isn't ordinary. Even when you're not physically there, your energy speaks. The universe itself had stepped in, like an unseen voice whispering, "This is not something to be taken lightly." For them, the joke quickly lost its humor. They realized that even mentioning your name had opened a door to something much larger than they were prepared to deal with. They had thought they could mock you, diminish you, make light of you. But instead, they found themselves reckoning with something they couldn't understand. The shift was undeniable. Your presence wasn't just something they could laugh at. It was something they would now have to reckon with. Number 13. Their own shadow was exposed through your light. They came looking for flaws. They sat in that psychic's chair with the intention of tearing you down, expecting to hear something they could twist into another reason to mock you. But what they didn't realize was that in trying to expose you, they had unknowingly turned the light onto themselves. At first, they felt in control, confident in their ability to manipulate the conversation, waiting for the psychic to reveal something they could use to validate their opinions about you. But something unexpected happened. The psychic didn't dwell on anything negative about you. Instead, their gaze seemed to pierce straight through the facade, stripping away the humor, the sarcasm, and the arrogance that had filled the room moments before. The focus shifted, and suddenly it wasn't about you anymore. It was about them. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. John 1:5. Have you ever noticed that those who attack others the most are often battling the deepest insecurities? That the loudest critics, the ones who seem obsessed with finding flaws, are often the ones running from their own? That's because light has a way of exposing darkness. And that's exactly what happened in that session. The psychic spoke with clarity, but their words didn't confirm what these people wanted to hear. Instead, the reading unraveled something hidden, something uncomfortable, something they had never wanted to acknowledge. Their obsession with you had nothing to do with you at all. It was a projection of their own internal struggles, their own dissatisfaction with themselves. The psychic described it as a shadow, one that had been cast by their own unhealed wounds. At first, they resisted. How could this be about them? They had come to hear about you, about what made you laughable, flawed, small. But the deeper the psychic went, the harder it became to deny. Their fixation wasn't about your success, your choices, or your personality. It was about what you triggered inside them. You were living proof of something they couldn't face, of the parts of themselves they feared, the regrets they buried, the potential they wasted. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? Matthew 7:3. The most unbearable part wasn't just hearing this truth. It was realizing how deeply it resonated. They weren't attacking you because they saw you as weak. They were attacking you because your presence, your resilience, and your very existence made them feel small. Maybe it was your confidence. Maybe it was your ability to keep going despite the odds. Maybe it was simply the fact that you never needed their validation to shine. Whatever it was, their envy ran deeper than they had ever been willing to admit. The psychic continued, painting a picture of how this shadow had grown. Every time they mocked you, every time they made a sarcastic remark, every time they tried to minimize you, they were not diminishing you. They were feeding their own darkness. Their need to tear you down wasn't a reflection of your worth. It was a reflection of how empty they felt inside. This isn't new. History has seen this play out time and time again. Look at Judas Iscariot. He walked beside Jesus, witnessing his wisdom, his miracles, his undeniable presence. And yet, rather than learning from him, rather than allowing that light to transform him, Judas grew resentful. The presence of someone greater than himself did not inspire him. It exposed him, and instead of facing his own shortcomings, he tried to eliminate the one who made him see them. A heart at peace gives life to the body, but envy rots the bones. Proverbs 14:30. Could that be what's happening here? Could their obsession with diminishing you actually be revealing something about themselves that they don't want to face? The deeper the reading went, the more their defenses crumbled. It wasn't you they needed to judge. It was themselves. Their anger, their bitterness, their relentless need to discredit you was never about you at all. It was a reflection of their own discontent, their own unfulfilled potential, their own lack of self-acceptance. They had come into that session believing they could control the narrative, but by the time they walked out, they had lost all sense of control. Therefore, whatever you have said in the dark shall be heard in the light, and what you have whispered in private rooms shall be proclaimed upon the housetops. Luke 12:3. The psychic didn't just reveal things about you. They revealed their shadows, their fears, their karmic consequences. They thought they were there to learn about you, but in the end, they were forced to see themselves for who they truly were. They had tried to harm you, but in trying to diminish you, they only harmed themselves. By the time the session ended, they weren't laughing anymore. They were sitting with a truth that would haunt them, the realization that you weren't the one who needed to change. It was them. They may have left shaken, bewildered, and humbled, but they also left with something far more valuable than any cheap joke could have given them: the opportunity for growth. The kind of growth that only comes when you stop pointing fingers and start turning the lens inward. Because in that moment, you weren't just a person they tried to ridicule. Beloved chosen one, you were the mirror that showed them who they truly are. Now the question is, will they learn from it, or will they continue to hide from the truth? Some will take this moment as a wake-up call, an opportunity to grow, to confront their own shadows, and to evolve. But others will resist, deny, and continue running from the reflection that has now been revealed. Either way, you were never the one who needed to change. It was always them. If this message resonated with you, if you found yourself reflecting on the power of energy, divine protection, and the way the universe always flips the script in favor of the chosen ones, then trust that you were meant to receive this today. Nothing happens by accident. The fact that you're here, that you made it to this point, is a confirmation that your journey is aligned with something greater than you realize. Your support means everything. If this message spoke to you, consider donating through Super Thanks. Your generosity helps keep this channel alive, allowing us to continue sharing these powerful insights with those who need them most. But whether you donate or not, know that you are deeply appreciated, valued, and blessed beyond measure. May your days be filled with divine favor. May every step you take be guided by light. and may no obstacle stand in the way of your destiny. May your heart be filled with unwavering faith, knowing that what is meant for you will never miss you, and what is not meant for you will always fall away. I pray that you continue to rise above negativity, that no words spoken against you will ever prosper, and that you walk with the certainty that you are never alone. May your mind be at peace, your spirit be unshaken, and your path be blessed with abundance beyond what you can imagine. May every seed you plant bear fruit, may your hard work be rewarded, and may your name be spoken in rooms filled with opportunity and favor. You are chosen, you are protected, and you are deeply, deeply loved. Stay powerful, stay chosen, and until next time, keep shining, because your light is untouchable.